just to introduce myself, my name is Ashley Honeyman. I am the COO, CFO of Consero Global. I think more importantly for this conversation, I have implemented Consero before when I was a customer, and I've also implemented ERPs at other companies. So this is a topic that I wouldn't say is near and dear to my heart, because if ERP implementations are near and dear to your heart, you found a better way to do them than I have, but I do know a thing or two about them.
Great. And then my name's Jennifer Daniel. I'm our VP of onboarding at Consero. I'm actually celebrating 7 years with Consero this month. My background really does live in the ERP implementation space, and it is very near and dear to my heart. And so I feel like we have a really good pulse on how to do that and to do it very well. Little on my background as it's going to apply to our conversation today. I've been in the finance and accounting space for 20 years, but I've spent 12 years of that working in systems and implementing and consulting, helping clients solution and understand how to solve, and really wanting to give a lens today of what it looks like implementing with VAR partners or with Consero, and really what you should consider when thinking about implementations.
Yep, exactly. And I'll give the CFO customer perspective. And because today we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of implementing directly an ERP, as well as implementing Consero's Finance as a Service, which is a little bit more than just an ERP implementation, because Finance as a Service includes your entire tech stack. So it's not just your ERP, it's also, your spend management platform, it's your T&E system, it's your account reconciliation. We have strategic CFO services if you need it, interim controller, we have FP&A reporting. There's a lot you can add on to that Finance as a Service piece. And just our quick plug background is we do have about 1,500 employees worldwide, over 300 customers. We're backed by my favorite PE company, BV Investment Partners, and we have some industry expertise in the nonprofit space, software, professional services. When I was a customer, I was at a professional services company. Next slide.
All right, so really where we wanted to start is signs that you've outgrown your current systems. When we start talking about ERP, these are your enterprise resource planning systems. It's really is your finance and accounting systems. And so really high level, if you're struggling with some of these areas, you might need to consider a new financial system or ERP. Top of the list will always be, for me, reporting. When your board or your team need advanced reporting, if you've got an Excel workbook with 15 tabs that requires 3 business days to really do inputs, do reconciliations, clean up, that's a really good sign that you need to evaluate a new general ledger or ERP to solve for that for you. Also looking at automation, I think we're all in an environment where we're trying to do more with less, and manual processes are really no longer acceptable in businesses that want to scale and have rapid growth. And so everything from AP processing and using emails for bills and getting approvals internally, like you've got to have automation as part of your framework. And so if all those processes are manual, really understanding when an ERP system is going to help you is going to drive value for automation. When your systems are limiting your growth, I mean, this really ties into manual processes. You really can't grow and scale and support a larger customer base. Your back end is going to be consumed with manual processes, and it can in time start impacting your growth. You're making it problematic for your sales team to make sales because of all of the requirements for your finance and accounting team. That's when you can start seeing truly impeding your growth through bad administrative processes. If you're also spending a lot of time on re-entering and reconciling data, there's a lot of great frameworks out there, whether it's Excel or QuickBooks, but it's still going to be redundant and data reconciliation because it's not going to be robust enough to meet your needs. All of that kind of encapsulates to the last point, which is when you're spending more time worrying about technology instead of strategic business goals, ultimately an ERP is designed to give you deep insights and visualization into the reporting of the health of the operations of your business. And when you can't even see that because you're worried about the technology and even being able to give you reporting, these are all signs that you need to consider an ERP implementation.
Yep.
Ashley, anything you want to add on that one?
From my experience, I think board reporting is a big one. So I've implemented before at a biotech because we needed reporting down to just a level that QuickBooks couldn't give us, right? Like we wanted to track molecule families, molecules, all of that, where the spend comes from. Systems limiting our growth really hits home. One of my ERP implementations was because we all of a sudden opened a new sub in the UK, and QuickBooks can't do subsidiaries at all. So that was a big one for me, systems limiting my growth for sure. And then when I implemented Consero, it was a little bit of everything, right? We had a new PE partner, so we needed better reporting. The automation wasn't there. It was very manual. They were on QuickBooks Enterprise. It was amazing. So systems limiting our growth. Oftentimes when you find that you have a single point of failure, or like you have a culture of firefighting, those are all good signs that your systems aren't really meeting your needs. Next slide. So when you think about an ERP, what are your options? And I've done it a few times. So typically, if you have an in-house team, and you're looking at going direct and getting your systems direct, you're going to need some sort of VAR partner or some sort of implementer. So you come out and you select your systems and you have a VAR that implements for you. And really, I would say what the VAR does is the VAR brings the systems expertise, and you're bringing the business and accounting expertise. And that's how you partner with that. When it says outsource here, it's more like if you have a bookkeeper already, or someone that's doing some of your accounting, they can oftentimes do the implementation if they have enough systems experience, or they might even work with a VAR to do some sort of implementation. And then the last is with Consero, who is a little bit different than a VAR, because they're going to be your implementer, and then they're all ultimately stuck with it too. So they have to make sure that what they implement is built for the long term. And I would say in that relationship, Consero or your FaaS partner really brings deep systems expertise, but also that accounting and best practice expertise. And what you bring is your specific knowledge about the business. But those, I would say, are the three options when you're going to look at implementation.
All right. And so once you've made the decision, you've selected the route that you're going to go, whether it's going to be a VAR, outsource, or working with something like a FaaS partner. We've got the 6 key considerations, which are going to be the topics of today's webinar. So first and foremost will be your system and your partner selection. What are you wanting to implement? What set of tools? There's a lot of options out there, as well as who you want to support implementing for you. So we'll go into more detail on that one. The other piece is going to be implementation scope and complexity. Implementations can range from, a really core. Are we doing fundamental GL and core accounting? Are we trying to solve for a very large full order to cash with full automation? So they can be very diverse on the scope and the complexity of how you approach it. And you need to really understand your internal environments and where you can be successful, and think through that scope as part of your strategy. The other thing to think through is cost and ROI. It's expensive to invest in technology, and sometimes there isn't always going to be an ROI, and understanding that and thinking through that ahead of system selection is going to be very important. So you have alignment with your internal stakeholders. Design and infrastructure. So how you design your ERP, your implementation of a ERP system is only as good as your design and the infrastructure you put in place. And so you need to understand your ability to create that framework with your partner and with your in-house team. Then we also have people and processes. And so this really is a reflection of, who are your in-house teams that you're working with, or your outsourced partners, depending how you want to go about it. And then making sure that you're putting in processes that are actually going to solve for your what problems are you trying to solve? And then we also want to think through scalability and flexibility. Everybody wants to be in the space of high growth and continuing to show those growth targets, and having infrastructure that can grow with you, and then you're not revisiting the same topic in 5 years if you've outgrown your solution, will also be very important. All right, so let's deep dive into these topics. The first one we have is system and partner selection. So when I think about the systems and the partner selection, it's the what. What are you wanting to implement when it comes to an ERP? And so really this is looking at a really large and diverse opportunities for technology. You've got the NetSuites, you've got the Intacts, you've got the Oracles of the world, but you also have different approaches today of, an ERP used to be your end all be all. You implemented one ERP. Well, now we live in a world where there's more approaches of best in class. And how are you doing AP automation? with T&E automation, and those tools might be third-party add-ons that need to integrate with your general ledger. And so really being able to understand what software do you need? Should it be a platform of software so you really have the best capabilities? When we look at ERPs, they're known for the financial framework, but they're also known for having, pretty rigid requirements because that's protecting the gap foundation of your systems and your processes. And so there might be other tools that are going to be more user-friendly. So we start thinking the Bill.coms of the world, or we might have Expensify or Ramp. And so really looking at the entire landscape is critical of what do you need to solve your problems. So that's one piece, is the what on the systems, but the other piece is what problems are you trying to solve? And so making sure you have a very clear understanding of, are you trying to solve for reporting? Are you trying to solve for AP automation? Are you trying to solve for order to cash automation? Are you trying to solve for all of those? So looking at those systems and navigating your specific business use cases and what those system capabilities are, and vetting, can they actually solve your problems, is going to be critical. And part of that is going to be mapping finance workflows from scratch. And so when you start thinking about system infrastructure, when you're doing this, in-house, if you're going to do this with your in-house team as an option and you're working with a VAR, your team's going to need to be able to say, here's all the processes that we want to optimize and to automate. And you have to be able to think through the framework of, how do those systems work well? And this is where a VAR can be a huge partner to you. VARs have expertise in what best solutions are going to work for your finance functions. But there's a counter to that too of, consultants and VARs, they're fantastic at solution orientation, but they're also going to create solutions that your team brings to the table that you need to solve for. And if those problem statements aren't correct, you might end up with a solution that doesn't really solve for your problem. So inherently thinking about system infrastructure, what workflows you need without replicating your current workflows, which is always a big risk, is something you want to consider when you're working with a VAR for an ERP implementation in-house. Then once you have all the systems kind of figured out, a partner becomes really important. Who do you want to work with to help you accomplish your goals, that can bring the expertise to help complete an implementation on time, on budget, and to really solve for your original pain statements. So that's how I would think through system and partner selection with the ERP side. And then Ashley, I'll pause on this, your perspective from CFO working with a VAR on ERP implementations.
Sure. So on ERP implementations, in my experience, it's you're almost like your typical software selection, right? Like first you have to figure out what you need. So usually for me, it's some sort of reporting, some sort of rev rec capability, probably, whatever those pain points are, like Jen said, that's what I'm looking for. And then what I do is I go ahead and I kind of do my search online, right? And I pick usually 3 to 5 vendors that I want to then evaluate and demo. And then you go and you evaluate and you demo them, you get down to 2, you go back and forth on price. And it's kind of a 3-month selection for the software. And then you have to find the implementer as well, unless the VAR came to you first. Sometimes chicken and an egg, but it's really evaluating those. And like Jen said, making sure you know what you're trying to solve for so that the demos can be really valuable when you're looking at those systems. So that's what I would say from the ERP side.
Perfect. And then we also want to look at the FaaS implementation. So if you want to go the route of working with an outsourced accounting provider that provides an end-to-end solution that owns the systems, the technology, and the people, that's what Consero considers within the FaaS model. This is going to be a very different infrastructure and approach to onboarding. So Consero does bring to the table a predetermined tech stack that is specifically designed to meet the needs of the industry where we have focus. And so, if you're in a different industry, finding a FaaS partner that has industry focus and knowledge would be important too. But what that brings to the table is a pre-built integrated tech stack. And so instead of taking the 3 to 5 months of like looking at the software, doing the demos, doing proof of concepts, understanding if it can meet your needs, which some of those can be paid engagements, that's going to be inherent with the product offering in whole. And it's already designed to be really applicable to your business and your industry. And there's also going to be a difference in like the team setting up the tech stack on proven models. When you work with a FaaS partner, the infrastructure is already defined of how it's going to work best. And you don't have to question like, hey, how are we going to configure different modules? All those outcomes are known and ready to be rapidly deployed. And this is also going to let you have access to best practices. Part of what we talked about working with the VAR is mapping finance workflows from scratch. And so understanding your business needs, and then what are actual best practices to solve for those with the lens of that the accounting is going to be continued to be owned and managed by that same team. I think you're probably going to hear Ash and I but say this a lot in this call in general of, when you're working with partners to implement, the fact that a FaaS partner has to own the outcome is going to increase your likelihood of success of, hey, we're not going to put in a process that's not going to work because those outcomes are owned on that team. And so that's a really important framework to think through of, when you're implementing the systems, the functionality, the workflows, and how it is configured matters so much to the success for your team that it's done properly using best practices, and you're not putting workarounds in that aren't going to necessarily work for you. And so that's how we look at the FaaS implementation of being able to be experts in the system, experts in the industry best practices, as well as staying apprised with the changes within that tech stack environment to bring all of that to you at the time that you're implementing.
Yep. And when I was a Consero customer, it was a little bit different when I was thinking about my decision, because my decision first was internal team and ERP or FaaS. And what played in that decision for me, and if you guys are thinking, do I do ERP or do I go FaaS? What I did was I looked at it and I said, okay, what's my next step once I make this decision? If I decided to go internal and ERP, it obviously means more control over your workflows because it's an internal team and it's, you have the tech stack, but it's a much longer time, because then you have to select your ERP and select your other tech workflows and select your partners, hire your people, and go on out. And with FaaS, it was just a lot faster, because once you make that decision, once you say I'm going FaaS, a lot of those decisions are already made for you, right? Because the FaaS team, they have the tech stack. They can start implementing tomorrow. They don't have to go through that eval process. They have the people. They don't have to make sure your internal team is ready to go. I mean, if your internal team is spending 50 hours a week on their current work, they can't do an ERP implementation. So you have to fix that first. And so that was when I was evaluating, am I going ERP or FaaS? Those were the things I was looking at. Next slide.
All right, implementation scope and complexity. So you've made your decision on who's going to implement for you and your approach. You've got the system selected. If you're going to go the VAR route for an ERP implementation, this is going to really require significant IT involvement. One thing that we talked about is it's likely not just an ERP that you're selecting. You're going to have add-on and third-party integration tools, but you're also going to have your current in-house tech stack, whether you've got Salesforce for a CRM, or if you've got a payroll provider and you're thinking through integrations. It's really going to have cross-functional requirements, whether it's going to be IT, sales ops, all the different stakeholders that are going to be in your company to help make sure the framework you're putting in, the integration capabilities, all of those are well thought through and you have alignment to be able to stand those up. When we look at ERP implementations, these typically take 9 to 18 months to get to go live. And I know that sounds like a really long time, but when you start looking at system selection, looking at your people, making a choice and doing that scoping documentation, getting into the requirements, it really does take 9 to 18 months to execute on time. And that's if it is even executed properly. You really do have a high risk of delays and budget overruns. One thing that I would see as a consultant working in a VAR capacity is you really would try to focus on the scope being a smaller scope, like looking at the core. How do we get a phase 1 for a core implementation? So I have basic AP, basic invoicing, and reporting. And the reason they start with that segmentation of phases is typically you don't have the time to dedicate to do a full implementation that could achieve all the results that you want. And so what ends up happening is you start peeling back layers of your requirements once you get in there and you're understanding, well, this core approach isn't going to solve our problems. And then you start thinking through, like, I want this to be automated. The system might have these capabilities. Well, a consultant's going to help you find a solution on the VAR side, but that's going to start driving up the cost. It's going to start driving up the time to implement. You're going to go ahead and see that your go live dates are going to start shifting to accommodate. When you look at the actual implementation time frame, I mean, I like to really think about peeling back an onion, right? You're going to continue to find more and more detail that you're trying to solve for, and it becomes more complex really quickly. Much like an onion, this can really bring you to tears. ERP implementations can be very painful. I had to add a little joke for all the accountants in the room. But it can be like our processes are not simplistic, right? When we have finance and accounting functions, the overlayer, it becomes very tricky to try to think through it big picture. And when you're doing this, you want to invest the time to do it right. And so there's always going to be risk for additional scope and additional complexity. And this is going to have a huge demand on your internal finance team. They're going to have to participate in all of the build and all of the testing. They're going to have to become expertise in using and training and understanding how to take over as soon as you go live within these systems, which can be very, very challenging depending on the tech stack that you choose. And so it's going to be very stressful, right? It's not uncommon for when we talk to customers to be like, hey, I think my team's going to quit if we're going to go do a new GL implementation. This is going to cause so much of an impact that you could lose resources. And so that's a reality of the stress that it's going to put on the team to do this work with a VAR. And there's also significant data migration. One of the biggest pain points that we see at Consero for clients historically has been the data migration set. You have to come through your current data systems and say, what are all my customers, my vendors, where are all my contracts? And I, questioning to the room, how many people here have all of their customer contracts documented in a file that's easily accessible with all the information needed to drive automation for billing and revenue recognition? Our experience is it's not very many. They're living in a file storage location in a PDF, and you might have a billing schedule at best, but it's not enough to drive automation. And so this can be a huge amount of work for an in-house team to work with data migration. And VARs are very clear cut in their statement of work. Data migration is on the client. Data cleansing is on the client. This is a huge, huge amount of time that needs to be spent here, but it's also one of the most important because junk in is junk out, right? You're not going to achieve any goals if you're not able to get to the right data set within your new GL. And when we look at the FaaS implementation side, there's obviously going to be a pre-integrated tech stack, but one thing that's different about Consero and the FaaS offering is we actually own the tech administration. You own all your data, it's transferable to you as you own it. The administration of that data set, setting up, configuring, access, maintaining, all of that resides with your FaaS partner. Consero does offer a 30 to 90 day deployment. Part of the things that we've talked about of system selection and making sure you're understanding what you're going to be implementing, like that's already predefined. And so we're able to do that and execute within 30 to 90 days. We also own all the configuration, the maintenance. The other piece is going to be building on best practices. So really understanding, as you've implemented, what are we going to be able to solve for? And how do we do that in the best way possible without adding additional complexity, without creating unneeded process steps. I have a really good example, and this is back from when I was an implementer. I had a client that could not afford the technology to automate the revenue recognition using Sage Intacct. And so we looked at, well, how do we create the same approach without the cost? And it ended up being in a very manual way. And so what it did is it created a very administrative task of manually converting like invoices and rev rec. It was a terrible process, and the client knew it was terrible, but it created systemization and audit-friendly ability to track. And so as of our partner, yeah, we came up with a solution, but should we have? I mean, I know that CFO ended up having to live with it, and it caused them pain for a long time, and they knew that going in, but ultimately going and thinking of like scalability, putting in a process like that versus having the alignment of the investment in technology, that's going to be an important driver. And so when we look at onboarding within Consero, we're not going to put in processes that are going to be a burden. We're going to put in the right processes at the right point in time. And then ultimately is the data migration. This is one of my favorite things when I joined Consero, to be able to say that we own data migration. Instead of putting all of the burden on the client, we're going to go pull all of your data from your system for you. So whether that's your vendor data, your customer data, analyzing it, analyzing your chart of account for you. We're going to do all that framework so your team's focused on the really strategic pieces. So we can help reduce some of that complexity that your team's trying to be only focused on strategic items. And that for me continues to be one of my favorite things that really helps ease the pain of an implementation and why we're able to do something so much faster than in the VAR space. Ashley, what thoughts do you have on this?
just again, speaking to my experience a little bit, when the two things that speak out to me most on this page are really around the time to go live and the data migration. So when I think about an ERP, usually, if you're trying to go live Jan 1, right? Let's back that up. You're trying to go live Jan 1. So in December 1, I always try like a soft go live. So you're running in parallel, and then try to back up. It's usually, and mine are smaller companies. Bigger companies take a lot more time. And this was, NetSuite or Intacct, not a massive like Workday or something. Back up from December 1st, 3 to 4 months. So usually you're trying to start implementation in August 1st, September 1st, ideally August. And then I think for really good partner and software selection, that's at least 2 months, usually more like 3 months, I would say. So should be starting to look for your software in May, right? So if you're starting that May 1, I think Jan 1 is a good go live. And just a side note here, go live in ERPs is this weird thing. You're live Jan 1, you're using the new system, but you still have to close December in the old system. So in January, if you went live Jan 1, all of January feels like you're in both systems because you're closing in the old system, but you're entering January bills and invoices in the new system. And so it's kind of double. And then Feb 1, when you do your first close in the new system, that feels like the real go live, but you were actually live on Jan 1. So I just want to let people know that for implementations. And that's ERP FaaS, doesn't matter. That's going to be the same because you always have to do the last close in the last system. And with those ERP implementations, the data migration is painful. Your VAR partner says, we need, all your GL outputs for this. We need all your vendor details, and they'll send you all of what they need in the format they need it. And your team spends all of their time on pulling data, formatting it, uploading it to the new system, pulling data, formatting it, uploading a new system. Once in a while, you have the fun calls where you talk about your chart of account or you talk about something interesting. But for the most part, it's a lot of data migration, and it's painful and it's not fun. In the FaaS implementation, I started end of March, we were live June 1st. So like literally April 2nd we started, we were live June 1st. Again, had to close in May, felt really live July 1st after we did when we were doing our first close in the new system. But it really is, they told me 60 days. I doubled it. I said it's obviously going to be 120 days. It wasn't, it was 60 days. They do a really good job. And what you're doing, you're still involved, but Consero goes and gets all your data. They do all of that work, it's really bad. Data migration is awful. But what you're doing is you're doing more around processes and policies and look at all of your 300 contracts and what buckets do they fall in? I was a professional services company, so we would have time and materials, fixed fee, and those different buckets. And then, okay, where do these fall? What's the rev rec on those? What's the billing on those? So it's much more strategic so they can own the go forward. So it felt much more about talking about how things work now and how things should work in an automated environment so that the go forward will be better. But none of it was around taking what I have from QuickBooks Enterprise and putting it in Intacct. None of it was that. So those are two key differences and things to think about in it from a timing perspective. Next slide.
All right, and really this is just a visual of what Ashley and I have been talking about of, when we say it takes 9 to 18 months to build in-house, what are the key components that you need to think about, which is people, having the right people, which we'll go into a little bit more detail, research and architect systems, right? You've got to go pick a system that actually has the capability to solve for your industry specific or your contract specific requirements. Then you need to refine and map processes to systems, right? You need to take all of your probably non-standard contracts and make sure you have a workflow and automation to support them if that's going to be your goal. Integrate and train users. The QuickBooks of the world are incredibly easy to navigate. Leveraging a full ERP, there's modules and there's different components to it. And there's going to be infrastructure that your users need to be able to understand how to use the system and knowing that they're not going to have access to those consultants necessarily as they go live. And then you're going to have your configuration. So configuring, making sure that everything works properly, reworking when you find out something isn't mapped properly. And then maybe you get there. Is it an optimized F&A function? Is it not? Do you find out what you put in place isn't going to solve for your problems? That's the target. With Consero, we do have this in 30 to 90 days. System selection's out. People selection, you don't have to worry about that. The team's going to be brought to the table. Best-in-class processes are already going to be created. Those components are the why of a 30 to 90 day implementation and go live being a reality for our customer base, leveraging FaaS. And that's designed to optimize you to the state that you need to be optimized as of today.
Yeah, my
Actually,
only thing to add here is I first saw this quote, I was like, 60% of ERP implementations fail. I'm like, either that's bullshit or I'm a really good CFO. But when I thought more about it, I think what it means by fail is probably doesn't hit all the marks you were going for. So my first ERP implementation was a NetSuite implementation, and one of the modules we bought was their advanced revenue recognition module, and we were going to do RevRec in the system. And so we worked with VAR, we uploaded that RevRec data. We were doing both systems kind of in December, kind of. And then Jan 1, we went live, right? But when we went live on Jan 1, the data we had uploaded for the RevRec model was already stale. And our VAR was gone at that point, and I didn't really know how to then make that data current. Like, do I delete that data? Do I upload new data? How do I get that to the current state so that I can use that advanced RevRec module? And at that time, I was like, I'm just going to keep the Excel file I have because it works and I know it works. And this module isn't useful for me. So the ERP went live. We used NetSuite. We had no problem with NetSuite, but my RevRec was still in Excel because I couldn't get that module to work for me because the data was stale. And after my VAR left, I didn't know how to do it. So I'm like, I wouldn't have considered an ERP implementation fail, but I can see how it didn't hit the mark. We were trying to automate revenue and it didn't hit the mark. And that doesn't really happen with Consero because they would just know how to upload the recent data and it would just get done. So I think that's what that stat is talking about. Like, how many ERP implementations do you go in? These are my goals, and you accomplish 2 of the 4. Probably a lot, because there's a lot of times where you say that'll be phase 2, but you don't get to phase 2 because it's too busy and what you have is good enough.
all right, cost and ROI. Technology can be expensive. Implementing tools that are designed to automate is going to take an investment. And so in full transparency, the way that we view this is a large upfront cost. There's not necessarily going to be a real ROI. Your ROI is going to be in efficiency, in faster processes, better reporting, more visibility, more strategic decision making, because you have infrastructure to do so. But total cost savings from the implementation or the system selections might be years out, just given the infrastructure cost in general. It's not uncommon to see just one-time fees just of implementing of $80,000 to $150,000 for a more core basic implementation. And that's just the one-time fees. And then also understanding if you work with a VAR, you're going to pay for your software licensing and the systems upfront. You're going to pay for it for an annual contract. They might be able to do pricing for you where they can allocate that out monthly, but it's an upfront due typically in the VAR space. And so understanding that you have to make that investment while you're implementing. So if you're spending, 6 months on an implementation, and if that gets pushed, you might be paying for software that you're not going to use in that year alone. There's also going to be ongoing costs for upgrades and maintenance. Part of the VAR world is providing maintenance to you. And so like, hey, I need a new report, or hey, we need to upgrade our technology. You're going to be reaching out to your consulting firm. You do an acquisition, you have a new entity, you need to bring that over. You're going to need to own that system and the cost to continue to create automation capabilities as needed, or just to add basic day-to-day information, right? That might be something you have to reach out to your VAR for. So getting to that ROI is going to be difficult to really be able to quantify that. And Ashley, I'll pause on that if you want to add your lens on the in-house build with the VAR.
Well, the only thing I'll say is I think for me, looking at both of these, like the implementation of an ERP, we have to look at as an investment, right? It's not it's not, oh, I implement this and I get this return. It's the return you get is a lot of the pain points we talked about, right? It's better reporting, it's a more automated process, it's probably more accurate data because there's in those better ERP systems, there's more you can do with end of month close to make sure those things are accurate. It's not quite as freeform as QuickBooks, so the errors are easier to spot. So it's really an investment. But I will say is your ERP investment takes longer to realize because it's such a long implementation time. Where on the FaaS side, it's 2 months. And after 2 months, you're live and you're in the Simple platform, which has fantastic reporting. I'm a huge Simple fan. That's our sheet that goes on, it kind of goes on top of your ERP, and then you don't have to be in the ERP. You can actually just see the information you need. But that's kind of what I'll say on this slide. I do want to give us a little bit of a time check, Jen. It's 1:40, so we have to move a little bit faster.
Yeah. All right. So design and infrastructure. So one of the most important parts is going to be the design and infrastructure of your ERP. So making sure you understand your outcomes that you need and put an infrastructure in place to deliver that. So master data, your chart of account's one of the most important parts. You can only report on the infrastructure that you put in place. And so making sure that you understand that and you're working with your consultants to design that framework out the gate. Reporting should be forefront of every decision you make on how you enter an AP bill and how you enter an invoice through the end of that life cycle. And so making sure you have that expertise on hand. One thing that is beautiful about the Consero FaaS implementation is part of it is we already have the tech stack of what do PE investors need? What does your board need out the gate? That infrastructure is going to be included. But we're also bringing really strategic CFO level consultants into our onboarding to have a conversation of what are your reporting goals? How should you as a VP of finance or a CFO be thinking about your reporting? What should that landscape look like? And then we're going to ensure that our entire approach lends to that outcome and that reporting, which, as Ashley mentioned, that's going to be delivered through Simple, which is our proprietary platform, which is available to your in-house, your board, your PE firm to consume financial reports.
Yeah, so the only thing I'll add here is if you're going ERP with a VAR, it is really critically important that you think about how you want your reporting to look. I mean, this is true for FaaS as well, but they just bring more to the table there. When you're going and you're thinking about your chart of accounts, it's very easy to take your current chart of accounts and use the same chart of accounts. Your current departments use the same departments, but you want to think about what else do I need? All of a sudden you have classes. How do you want to use those classes? Do you want your different business units to be able to get a full P&L? Do you have product lines you want to be able to track? There's so many things that you really want to think about because NetSuite and Intact are so much more powerful than QuickBooks. And there's so many ways you can slice and dice your data and track your information. So that's one thing in the ERP you really want to think about. In FaaS, they bring a lot of that to the table, or they'll eke it out of you. But when I went through my FaaS implementation, they showed me their standard chart of accounts, and I said, well, this is a problem. You don't have COGS on your chart of accounts. And they said, yeah, we think of COGS as a department. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I said, of course, that's the best way to do it, because then I can look at an income statement with salaries, consultants, T&E, all of the kind of GL things I need. And then I can look at an income statement with COGS, gross profit, G&A, like my typical GAAP financial statement that you'd see in an audit. It made so much sense to me. And I had implemented ERP several times and never even thought of that. And there's just things that because Consero's done it 300 times, like more than that, they know kind of the best practice and the best way. And so they bring insights that you don't get from the VAR, because the VAR kind of is leaning on you to do that. You're the business expert. Tell us how you want your chart of accounts. But in both situations, really think about, okay, end state in a year, when I'm giving reporting to my private equity company, when I'm giving reporting to my C-suite, what does that need to look like? And then obviously the Simple platform is fantastic. Simple, you can give, like Simple makes my life so easy. My head of marketing, my head of sales, everybody's in Simple. They get their financials through Simple. They're just posted straight from Intact, and I don't even have to do any Excels for them. So it makes my job a lot easier. Sorry, next slide.
Right. And this one, for me, anyone considering an ERP implementation and their approach, your people is fundamentally going to be one of your most important. Like the what system you choose, but the people is going to be number two. When you go to build out an ERP implementation in-house, your implementation is only going to be as good as the person on your in-house finance team that you put in charge of designing and implementing the systems and the processes. VARs will do what you tell them. They are going to give you best practices if you ask. But if you put a controller in the seat to design your ERP implementations, they are 99% of the time going to give their current state to a VAR and say, design this. This is what we do today. And inevitably, you will not solve for your goals. If your team does not have gap expertise and they don't understand the business requirements, they don't know how revenue should be treated for your contracts, they are not going to be able to work with an advisor and a consultant to get to gap accounting treatments. Consultants are going to bring that level of skill set. You might have to go hire someone with gap expertise, but the person sitting in the seat doing the framework, you need to trust them inherently that they can bring scalable systems and processes, and they can bring in the design infrastructure. They have the gap knowledge. They understand what should be automated. They know what should be left behind, that you're trying to eliminate manual processes. There's no You'll get a lot of controllers that want, hey, I want job security. I want the whole company reliant on me to be able to continue to operate. And the goal is to make the company reliant on processes and systems and create automation so your controller or your in-house team could be strategic and providing insights to you as a CFO. And so making sure you have the right person in the seat, I can't overstate enough, that part is fundamentally critical to the success of your implementation. Differentiator with Consero on the FaaS implementation, there's going to be a full team with complete experts on implementing systems. We bring what we call a VP of onboarding that's going to be a strategic advisor to you as a CFO or the VP of finance saying, here's how you should think about it. If I were you implementing this, this is what I would do. Well, here's how we're going to operate from a delivery perspective. You want to do this, but here's what's going to happen when you do. And really being able to challenge you and hold you accountable to what infrastructure is putting in place. And this goes back to when you're working with a FaaS partner, we own the outcome and the delivery. So putting in a process that isn't going to meet the objectives would be a lose-lose for everyone. And so there's going to be a very high focus on making sure we're solving for the problems in a sustainable way. And so really bringing in full gap expertise, writing a 606 memo for you, creating a full set of accounting policies for you on your behalf. Your participation in this is going to be guiding of what are your unique business requirements. Advise us how you're operating, and we're going to be a strategic partner that's telling you how to solve for your problems and how you should be thinking differently so you can focus more strategically. I didn't leave you much time left, Ashley, but
Yeah, no, I mean, we still have scalability and flexibility to talk about, but I think you hit the nail on the head on this one. I think people are really important, and whether it's ERP or FaaS, I encourage everyone to step back and try to think strategically. I think it's very easy with an ERP implementation to have your accounting lens on. But as you're building this, you want to think about what's best for the company as a whole. What reporting do we need? What level of detail do we need to get there? And try to come up with a system that allows you to get there versus replicating your current processes, which happens a lot. We're all guilty of that. And then one thing I will say that's really nice about Consero through this is they actually do develop your policies. When I was done, I had my full ASC 606 policy. Basically, after the implementation, you're more or less audit ready because you have all of the policies that your auditors ask for you whenever you go through an audit. What's your RevRec policy? What's your bad debt policy? What's this policy? And you end up with like this huge memo from Consero that has all of your policies, processes in one document, which is not something that you even think about going through the ERP implementation. You kind of do it, and then you get to your audit and you're like, oh, shoot, we need to go put together that policy doc, which is fine, but it's just it's one of those things, kind of extras you get with Consero. All right, next slide.
All right, scalability and flexibility. So once you've got your system selected, you're doing your implementations, you still do need to think about scalability and flexibility. When you're working with a VAR implementation, they really are going to be looking at like, how do you add more headcount? What is it going to be the reconfigurations? Let's say we did a core, we did a phase one, understanding what those phase two looks like. Who's guiding that roadmap for you of bringing the next level of automation? That's going to be something that you always want to think about. And one thing that we do think on too when evaluating future clients is what level of automation do you need now? Right? Like not everybody needs full automation of their revenue recognition. There might be a total upside down ROI to put it in, but it's important to get it done right, which means you need to address the process. And so understanding when you're choosing your technology, like it's flexible, it can meet all of your needs long term, but also honing in on what you need at this point in time to be able to scale. And then a partner that you can trust that you can bring them in to kind of bring that to fruition once you get to the appropriate phase. But that can be problematic if you don't have that person in house to help you think through, hey, is it time? Right? You know, accountants are great at maintaining a finance function, but knowing that you have the ability to scale and be flexible is going to be really important. With a FaaS implementation, this is designed to scale. We're going to bring in the right level of technology without over suggesting too much if you're not ready for it. But then it's also going to be easy to flex up or down. So as your company grows or pivots, or you have new revenue streams, you have new different capabilities, those could be very challenging. You know, all of a sudden your executive team has a new idea of how to expand your product offering. Well, the finance function needs to be able to go rewrite that system capability. And so making sure you're choosing systems that can be flexible and allow you to scale and grow will be really important. And then everything we've talked about goes into that is, do you have the right people that can bring the skill set to that to be scalable and flexible? Are the systems capable of doing that? And as you design and create that framework. Actually, I'll hand it to you to.
I'll just give a couple thoughts on here. With an ERP, you do want to think about kind of scalability and flexibility. I mean, the best time to get anything from an ERP provider is before you sign the contract, right? Once you sign the contract, you're kind of done. Like I wasn't able to get rid of that RevRec module because if I got rid of the RevRec module, my whole package fell apart and I lost my 35% discount that they gave me, and it actually was more expensive, right? Like they were so rigid. Support was extra, so I didn't pay for it. And so whenever I needed support for my system, I just combed through the internet basically to figure it out. So there's a lot of things to think about there. Your systems are a lot more rigid when you are buying them direct. And if you are doing that, what I will tell you is make sure you negotiate for what you need up front. Always get more than what they originally offered. Like I think a 30 to 40% off is pretty standard, and negotiate how long that discount comes. Sometimes they'll give you that discount for 5 years, and then on your 5th year, your price balloons. Make sure you cap price increases. They're pretty tricky there. But it is hard to scale up too, because as soon as you need a new module, you're captive audience. Versus in FaaS, like it's kind of pre-negotiated. So obviously there's an increase, but we can tell you now what it would be. So that's what I'd say there.
All right, this last one is really just meant to be a summary of what we've talked about on ERP versus SaaS and looking at the timeline, right? What's your sense of urgency and the timeline that you have to deploy? Tech stack, understanding, you know, you're going to build it custom, right? Do you have the skill set? And do you have the real investment to be able to do that and do it right to meet your needs, to make sure that what you implement meets your outcomes? And then the flexibility, right? And your strategic support. These are the items that you should really be considering. And then with FaaS, it's going to be a 30 to 90-day implementation. We'll bring the team, we'll bring the industry best practices and the ability to meet the reporting needs. Both are great options, right? If you have a really strong team and you know what you're leaning towards and what you want to build, traditional ERP is great. But if you have gaps there, that's when we recommend finance as a service to bring all of that into one service offering to help you meet your goals.
Thank you so much, Jen and Ashley. This has been a great event.